Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Hopefully, my voice is loud enough for you. The title. Can't. All right. The title of this evening's episode is Beyond the Surface of the Mind. And so I want to have a more deeper look at the design of the intelligence of the moment and if it has a sort of depth. You see, the body is very obvious. The body shows you itself instantly, yet your mind seems to be an untangible phenomenon. Primarily, the main thing I want to say is that I find our minds are designed to translate objectivity into subjectivity. And this sort of objective evolution, which has moved towards a subjective evolution, as if there was a point in history where our bodies were evolving faster than our acknowledgement of them. Now, our acknowledgement of our bodies is evolving much faster, as if just like how you can say as a civilization evolves, many cultures are evolving at different speeds. We can similarly say, as the objective being was in some sense evolving, various aspects or parts of the mind came into position. You see, your brain is a very interesting phenomenon. It's a billion, you can say it's a billion-year old kind of process that's going on. I find that without DNA, there would just be there would be nothing. Nothing in some sense to live for. Different parts of the brain took different million years to evolve, as if we had a reptilian brain, and then in some sense there was the evolution of the frontal lobe and various ways the intelligence of the being could acknowledge itself. You see, when we look at the word mind, I consider that to be the surface. I consider the most basic initial awareness the person has. So pretty much you are a phenomena which is based on a multiplicity of data or various data streams. That means your intelligence is how you have processed data or how data has been processed. For example, you don't have to think about your heartbeat or your lungs. You breathe naturally, involuntarily. But in certain aspects and decisions that we make, we have more of a voluntary kind of influence there, as if you choose to wear a watch, you choose to go to work, you choose to live a life. And of course, I'm not saying it in the sense that people were born without their permission. In some sense, we are born first, and then the identity emerges due to how much data it is exposed to and how it translates the data. When I was younger, I entertained the notion that souls entered bodies. I entertained this idea that there was a soul that was kind of moving around the body before it was born, and in some sense entered the womb and whatnot. I entertained that idea. That means I saw that idea as valid. That's what entertaining something means. You provide access for its realness. And so when I was in that situation wondering, I came into and the reason I was approaching things that way is because for a long time I felt in my childhood I was not in my body. That means when I look at my memories, especially those people who don't have a lot of memories from childhood, of course there is probably a neurological reason to it, but I'm saying there's also, one can entertain this, like I entertained this sort of notion that whenever I was not conscious, I was not in the body, but when I say I wasn't in the body, I'm not talking about the new age out of body traveling around kind of thing. I have two views. For me, out of body means something else. It means out of definition. It means out of a form. That means the intelligence of the moment is not functioning as a shape in the moment. It is functioning as the movement of all shapes. It's kind of the inseparability one recognizes through advanced progressions through meditative practice, where in some sense the meditation is no longer about a result. It transforms. It's as if you go searching for truth, and midway you suddenly realize uh, the truth you're seeking has to be found with your true eyes. As if anybody could. It's like this. Imagine a child who's about to make a mistake. Some elder comes to the child and says, "Don't do this." The child hears the advice but cannot comprehend, does not have the experiential context to accompany the concept shared. And so the child goes on making the mistake. For me, out of body is a suggestion of non dual existence. And non dual existence means it is not conceptual. So, kind of what I'm trying to say is that in my childhood, I felt when I was not conscious, I did not exist. Okay? I had that mentality. Even though I did exist, there was no utility, as if unless the person is awake, they can't do much in their sleep. You know? In ancient mystical traditions, I later on found out that they had this conception that when you sleep, that your intelligence begins working through a different dimension. In ancient mythology, they had this notion the person would dream and they would, in some sense, be in the spirit world. You see, as if when they're awake, as if wakefulness leads you towards the truth of matter. But in regards to sleep and unconsciousness, trust me, most people are trying to study their consciousness. Not a lot of people study how they are unconscious in the moment. What that means is the problem with ego and pride is that it limits your surge of your inner existence, of your inner being, because it limits you to certain concepts. A person who's proud does not want the ideas that they're holding to change. A person who is egotistical or egoic, what that means is the person is, in some sense, they have a thought of their self which they never want to change. They become pretty much a bulldozer in society because they don't change. They don't. For them, change is not as important as that is that which is kept. For me, everything I have had in this life, even thoughts less though, but even including thoughts, have come to me and gone. That means when I was like, what is this? Like I am eyes that have opened, that have in some sense contained the whole intelligence through an idea, through a personality. That means it's very funny. If I tell you bring your personality and put it in front of me on the table, that notion you have of who you are, it exists in an invisible room behind your eyes. That invisible room is real, okay? But it is real to you. This is the incredible opportunity that we fail to see as a species. That we have a multidimensional complexity that is not managed yet. That means it's very interesting. If you're looking for something, if you're looking for a physical truth, you will endlessly, like a program, go on searching until you see that outline of the truth that you're seeking. You see, this is very hard. This is why it makes it very hard to predict the future, because the free will can shift according to the data. For me, I have a very bold claim that I make, and it's a theory that I entertain because I find this to be the case. I feel there can be no such thing as time travel because the sense of self has changed. Even if we travel in the past, it will not be the past. It will be a different past. Do you see? And so the mind is very complex because there is an inner quest and there's an outer quest. Your outer quest is pretty much live life physically and in some sense seek efficient vision, try to live efficiently, and also try to, how can I tell you, it's like evolution is the coolest party. Evolution is one of the coolest ideas because it is an idea that encompasses the continuity through change. There's only two ideas on this planet that I feel continue that way. One is the notion of eternity, and the other is the notion of evolution, which applies to temporal creatures. You can say evolution is the eternal effort of temporary creatures to survive. So we have to kind of look at our history. We have to look at the design of a phenomena to occur. This is something most people don't say about failure and problems. Your problems and failure, they're not nothing. It's not like something out of your control. They are a design in your awareness. Once you start treating yourself, like think of it this way, for eons, for a long time, okay? Human beings and creatures have in some sense been trying to just associate and conduct their intelligence materialistically. We are that point of evolution which for the first time has enough of an awareness to the immaterial that in some sense a sort of subjective position has been granted to the individual. That means an author's words are in some sense a representation of the author, the world the author was seeing to write those words in. Sometimes when you look at a problem, you understand where to find the solution. Until you have not looked at the design of your problem, no solution can be granted, or any solution will be granted will be a waste of time in some sense. You see, it's one thing to wait for the world to save itself, but it's another thing to save yourself from the world you see. That is why the word mysticism has stayed so long. And words, they have purposes, they have destinies. Believe it or not, they do. Language, concepts have a value, have an inherent, either they're efficient or inefficient value to the current being, to the active intelligence. And so this concept, it comes in society. So think of it in this amazing way. That in some sense, it's not that just being entity, like it's not just people that are born and animals that are born and creatures that are born. Ideas are born too. And ideas are members of civilization, and if they are disregarded, they will fade. If they are regarded, they will stay. You see, so our challenge right now is that it's kind of like the whole civilization, I'll be honest. Technology is kind of steering us towards there, but it's fine. Let me tell you what's happening to the civilization, or at least a way that we can perceive it. Pretty much imagine after human beings made a mistake, okay, whether the mistake was from the Garden of Eve or whether it was a nuclear mistake that we made in nowadays, okay, it doesn't matter. Religion is a metaphor at its core because it is something beyond the sensory. Metaphor is one of those transcendental items in language that can move beyond sensory explanation. Metaphors are like images that echo multidimensionally and thus present to you various views. The civilization made a mistake. Now it's the consequence phase. Now we're seeing the mistakes that we've made. That means many children are going to open their eyes in a civilization that had a possibility for efficiency or did not take it. Something like that. We can look at the ignorance of our ancestors. Okay, they were foolish. Now what? Do you see? That's how I handle history. Because if I really looked at history, let me tell you what historians have. Historians are some of the only people on this planet who can have pure emotions of the value of the earth to some degree. You see, it is the world is clothed in stories. These stories present in them characters and setting. So the world and self-dynamic is present. This world and self-dynamic was an evolutionary leap. It was as profound as how this animal stood on its two legs, where before it was using four of them differently. There came a dynamic shift in a way that being kept itself static. So as children of the modern era, we have opened our eyes to a mistaken kind of civilization. A civilization which is like this grand ship that is holding all of us, which is our greatest value. Our civilization is the greatest thing we have to, in some sense, surviving. And our civilization is mistaken. That means it's divided. There's a division between what the consumer wants and what in some sense, the main institution is selling. There's this difference because people have been valued differently. Let me tell you how values of people are so fascinating because they change all the time. You see, I have a twin brother, and who my twin brother was when I was young has changed so many times, and who I have been, who has interpreted who my brother is, has changed so many times. We are constantly colliding with change. This is why playfulness works really well. This is why a person who seeks too much perfection will suddenly see impermanence, imperfection, and incompleteness charge at them. You see, that philosophy is not for the faint of heart. It is for those who are ready to move beyond their world. Mysticism, spirituality, only if you have seen enough of this physical reality, call yourself a spiritual being. Do you see? Only when you are ready for a sort of chaotic nullification of how your knowledge constructed itself before. That is true mysticism. That is true spirituality. Spirituality is not a bunker. It's not a sort of escapism. And that's what a lot of communities are using. And when I looked at the New Age community, I was like, you guys have the right values, but you're looking at the wrong thing. As if the lack of responsibility on a universal level for all intelligent phenomena, it is lacking. It is lacking in civilization. And it can only be brought about through integrative, endless efforts of dialogue. That's it. We are a species that communicates. We used to be warriors, a purely warrior species. That means we in some sense killed to survive. Now we must communicate to survive. And the species should not be shy. Because the more data we have, the better the civilization can process itself. It's as if, imagine society came to people, the greatest institutions of governments of any sort of country, culture, whatever context, just the institution was like, for once, let's just see that we're not 8 billion bodies, we're not 8 billion animals, we are 8 billion minds. And what can these minds do? Well, initially we see that the mind changes the self, and as the self changes, the world changes, or it changes the world. As the world changes, the self changes. This is why when you see a movie that impacts you, when you hear something that impacts you, when you hear like a Japanese artist on the street playing like a unique instrument, you know, in that moment, something from how the world was kept before has changed, thus the personality construct has had an evolution. Every time I breathe, that's subtler data. There's various ways that data appears to the intelligence of the being. It either appears to you as particles, as forms, as shapes and stuff, or it occurs as fields of intelligence, which are in some sense dynamic motion. So pretty much, data comes to you either as a particle or it comes to you as a wave. Okay? So what I'm saying is that now we are in this unique biological kind of situation as creatures where it wasn't easy, guys. I had to throw away the world I wanted to succeed in to see this. I had to rip my beliefs like a blindfold that was attached to my face by myself. And only when I did that, true compassion arose, because I saw something more than myself to care about, as if the self, once it lives for the world, will experience itself as the life of the world. That is the great calling. As you know, in a science fiction novel of mine called The Messenger of Giants, it's still a work in progress, but it's one of those things that I really hope all my listeners and viewers engage with. In this science fiction novel, there's many parallel realities to the world, and there's many stories of the world, okay? And so, in some sense, there's a story where, how would I say it to you? where in the future all governments have merged into this institution called the Enlightened Society. The Enlightened Society was the first multi-dimensional government, the first governing institution that, in some sense, governed 9 parallel dimensions of Earth. Okay, in my science fiction novel, there's an idea like this. Like this is the actual idea, and so what happens is that the Enlightened Society suddenly, the governing institution got enlightened when it suddenly revalued how it was seeing those it was governing. And when it saw that every government, when it suddenly realizes it is the people, it will live for the people. Whatever you value, you live for. If you're valuing money, you're living for money. If you value people, you're living for people. If you value the continuity, the evolution, advancements of this civilization that after 4 billion years, this science project has continued miraculously. Do you know, I was like, oh my God, how did the early human beings conduct childbirth? How did the first women know that there was a child in them? You see, after intercourse. You see, and it was all through this sophisticated intelligent design. That means the way we came as creatures into this world, the world had enough automatic involuntary intelligence and design, which makes it seem that us thinking our knowledge in words and language is real knowledge is nothing compared to the world we're living in. The world we're living in is a secret storehouse of unique, intelligent ways that data moves. Your attention, you have to look at the universe and smile. You know why? Because you're a natural being. Imagine in the future, which I cover in my science fiction novel, children suddenly have gone into a position where it's as if human beings have been. Okay, this is amazing. I'll tell you this. In this story of the book, human beings have embraced technology to such a degree that people started having robotic surgery. Eventually, there was so much robotic surgery done that human beings were no longer human beings. As if the guy changed his arm, suddenly he saw he could move a lot of stuff. Then he changed his whole body, and eventually we became technological entities that lived in the past archetypes of humans. So pretty much robots acting human. Okay? In this society where robots all have acted human, and there's the last human on Earth, this girl named Tara. And she's being sentenced to either be, she had the choice of becoming a robot, or she chose the choice of dying as a human. And she chooses to die as a human, and she's sentenced to the electric chair by robots, I learned. Pretty much what happens is that she goes on this electric chair, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I want to tell you this. She goes on the electric chair, and she's looking at a class, an aristocracy kind of class of people there, looking at the public execution, and it's these rich robots in suits and dresses and tuxedos, but they're all robotic beings. And they're looking at the last human on Earth. And she looks at the world and she sees. I'm not gonna tell you. She survives, like a backup program in this robotic civilization saves her, you know. But anyways, what happens? What I'm trying to tell you is that there is a chance that we will make intelligence or the intellect our highest value, and we will seek to liberate that faculty. The intellectual faculty of your existence, you will choose to liberate it. What that means is the moment you see you can have access to all data, you will try to be God. If there was a button here, and this button was be God or not be God, how many people would press that button? So most people would be like, okay, I want to be God. Instantly they would press the button. You know, some people would be like, I can't be God. If I am God, then where will I be? And they don't press the button. And what that suggests is whether we're going to, in some sense, humanity has an extinction danger of taking this natural human consciousness into a technological simulation loop. What that means is when virtual reality becomes more interesting than reality, humanity has died. That's our extinction. That's the technological extinction. So it's very important. It's very important that I change the song. Okay, haven't heard this in a while. Our mind begins to reveal that it can move in different directions. What we consider to be free will could be said that at its early stages was the movement of nature. This movement of nature evolved to a way where it could be individually conscious. The moment suddenly we were man in a world rather than man just the unconscious movement of the world, the conscious evolution began. That means the first time we began to suddenly notice our reflection in the pond. You know, the ancient caveman looked at himself in ice or something. You know, and it was one of those situations where there was suddenly individuality was evolving in this unconscious collective system. So in this unconscious collective environment, suddenly a conscious individual evolution took place, and suddenly data began shaping itself to be a container of sorts. So we can say the mind was the effort of nature to be a container, but it suddenly became an abstract individual container. Now in 2019, people contain themselves with language, with imagery. We wear different clothing to represent who we are. We get different tattoos to represent different parts of our mind. You know, there's some people, they say a tattoo is a bad thing, and even though I am never drawn to a tattoo because I feel this, my body, the colors of it is already a tattoo. Yeah. It's nature's tattoo on me. I don't need to tattoo over nature's tattoo. You know, that kind of idea. But for me, a tattoo is a representation of a parts of some image or symbol in that person's mind that was incredibly valuable to them. This is why you ask anybody about their tattoo, it's as if a memory. It's as if they have, in some sense, made a memory eternal on their skin. Um, I don't know how I got into this, but this individual evolution worked in a way where it started to represent itself externally. So it wasn't enough for this kind of conscious creature on the surface of this planet to just see a reflection of itself. It had to start creating itself. Do you see? It had to start creating itself beyond, subjectively. Of course, objectively, there was the processes of biological reproduction on it. But I'm saying it began to reproduce its individualness through others. This is why, and this is where we are currently, to some degree, where we have come to currently, where people, when you get mad at someone, you don't have that person's eyes. You have your eyes, which are in some sense choosing to interpret their pattern of intelligence in such a way. This is why they say when you're angry, you're blind. Any person who is angry in a moment of anger, and of course, it's not that you're always like that. Anger, it depends on the maturity of the individually conscious entity and how much it is not just an individually conscious entity. You see, we are, you can say a child's life, or we can say a child becomes a man when the inner existence of that child is no longer dependent on the outer conditions. So this is where I say it can happen quick. If the child recognize it, it shifts from the copy paste mentality of survival to the own authentic raw intelligence. Let's see what's going to happen kind of mentality. Okay, we have to first, it's kind of like this. You see people in society, it's as if they're not themselves. No, but everybody who enters society is possessed by the outer conditions. You know, it's like possession is not a new idea, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a religious idea. It is how pretty much you can say when the lion devoured the gazelle was possessed by the lion's jaws. okay, was possessed by an outer force. So constantly our momentary intelligence has had to confront the world happening to it and it happening to the world. But what the ancient mystics understood is that once this individualness was no longer against the world, when it wasn't you against the world, it was suddenly the world is here now. And it was that sort of all. We can say the animal to only working with its old methods into the human being. The human being is a conscious definition. It is how consciousness moves language onto itself and beyond itself. So think of it this way. It's as if me and you were like, okay, this civilization's functioning this way. How can we make it better? And it's like we start giving mirrors to people. When you give mirrors to people, people begin trusting their true intelligence. Once they find their true nature in some sense and abide by it, that's when their true intelligence steps out. Think of it this way: just like a kid can be shy and like imagine it, like when a teacher says a question in class and says, who has the answer for it, and none of the students responds. That's not true. Some of the students have the answer, but due to a sort of shyness of social engagement or external engagement, like they're a bit shy. They're hesitating to actually engage and experience the world. It's kind of like the same hesitation one finds before they enter a roller coaster. Embrace change and observe change. Okay, to take this back to the mind, there's a Zen story of Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma, I believe, was the fifth patriarch of Buddhism. And so, what is this story of Bodhidharma? Bodhidharma, I believe he goes to Japan. He's a patriarch of Japanese patriarch of Buddhism. He goes to Japan, and he goes to meet the emperor. And the emperor there had made a lot of Buddha statues and temples, spread Buddhism, and he awaits Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma enters the hall of this emperor. The emperor is there with some, I don't know, some his right hand kind of counselor or advice, his consigliere. The emperor back in the day in that Zen time was standing there with his consigliere, and Bodhidharma enters the hall with his vast presence, and he's a very, in regards to his communication, he's chaotic. You know, that means so Bodhidharma comes into the hall. The king tells Bodhidharma what he has done, and he looks at Bodhidharma and says, "Bodhidharma, tell me, what's the enlightening merit of what I've done? Like look at how much Buddhism I've spread. Look at how much statues of Buddha I've made. Look at how many temples and monasteries I've saved down. Tell me, what's the merit?" Like he's saying it like that. And Bodhidharma looks at the man and says, "All you have done is foolishness," and he leaves. Like, dude, like this guy has no consideration. This man is an emperor of a nation, and he can kill him instantly. He doesn't. Bodhidharma is he has his journey on this earth was not a material one. There are some embodied beings, but they're not actually here. They're somewhere else. That means they're not here for a physical destiny. They're here for a non-physical destiny. Non-dual destiny, which means a sort of contentment of an ultimate acceptance of the universe. But anyways, so Bodhidharma leaves, and the king is like, "What the fuck?" The king doesn't know how to respond, and suddenly the right hand man of the king goes to the king and says, It's not that what you have, and the king looks at him and says, like, what does he mean? And the guy says, it's not that you, in some sense, uh, there's no merit in what you have done. It's just your attitude in that moment was so desire bound that it could not be free at all. You see? Trust me, even rudeness is data. You just have to see how accurate it is. So, anyways, what happens is that Bodhidharma leaves the kind of palace, the castle, and he goes to one of the walls of the castle, like outside of the castle, and just meditates there. His face is faced like inches away from the wall of the castle, and he just meditates like this. This is how Bodhidharma meditates. Yeah. And it was smart because when he opens his eyes, he can return to his meditation. There's nothing to draw him out of his meditation, sensory wise. And anyways, so how the story goes is that years pass and Bodhidharma's gone into some unique states of samadhi and he's relocated and whatnot. And one night, suddenly this bewildered traveler comes to him. And this guy spends many nights just waiting there. And he sees Bodhidharma is in his meditation. He's not leaving out. One night, Bodhidharma stands up, and it's not even his like. Trust me, once you transcend the language, once you move beyond the language threshold, once you're no longer an egoic entity, some ancient minds consider that's actually when your life begins. When you're not trapped by an idea that you think has to happen. When you're free to actually see the world, that's when you can love it. You cannot love someone if you want something from them because you don't see them. You see what you want. That's why inauthenticity is like plaguing our social environments all over the world. The guy finds Bodhidharma, he runs up to him, and Bodhidharma is not even seeing him. Bodhidharma is in some like kind of very unique state of where what's important in its experience is not an existential phenomenon, you know. And so Bodhidharma is not even acknowledging this guy. And as the Zen story goes, guys, the guy, the traveler says, Bodhidharma, please help me. He's in some sort of beggar mode of help. And he suddenly cuts his left hand. He does something insane, as if like when he cut his left hand, Bodhidharma's like, he did that so the guys, Bodhidharma probably to be like, holy shit, this guy's gonna die right now, and help him. But like, when the guy cuts his hand, Bodhidharma as if like nothing has happened. He's walking, you know. And of course, guys, mystical behavior cannot be only analyzed from the outside. It's like trying to, it's like you thinking you know the author by just reading what he's written. And it's never possible. There's more dimensions of it. So what happens is Bodhidharma sees this guy and eventually grants him an audience. And the guy's like, Bodhidharma will be loyal to you and whatnot, but please help me, my mind's restless. And Bodhidharma's like, what? And he's like, Bodhidharma doesn't say it like that. What? Bodhidharma says he's waiting for the guy to say his problem. And the guy says his problem is, I can't sleep at night. My mind is restless. Please pacify my mind. That means the guy has an internal issue that is more than is causing him more suffering than his external issue. Like, for example, he was willing to cut off his hand to get rid of this problem of his mind, And of course, this is an ancient story, guys. They were much more primitive and savage back then. Okay, so there was no political correctness, in the battlefield. And so what happens is Bodhidharma looks at this guy and says, okay, bring your mind in front of me and I will pacify. And it is said that something occurs in this man that in some sense gives him nirvana. He attains liberation. He becomes free from the shackles of the past upon his future. And so he suddenly thinks about it. It's like, oh my God, I can't find this mind. And he says, I can't find it, Bodhiyama. He's getting scared. And Bodhiyama looks at him and says, there, your mind is pacified. So that's the profound thing, that the problem never existed. And we keep many problems in existence. Your free will right now is out of boredom engaging with certain patterns of ignorant and cruel behavior that you don't realize. But how we bring this all into an ultimate conscious attention is to recognize where the attention is. This is why most meditation practices has pretty much come to the conclusion, be here and now. Because there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else for truth to be. You can, even if you find truth, it is an access now. It is a momentary experience of how mind is moment and moment is mind. How world is now. How the world is being now. So the depth and design of intelligence, its design, which is on the surface, is dualistic, I consider, and its depth is non-dual. And when we truly choose to live lives of deep meaning, of deep value, we cannot ignore. We cannot ignore the responsibility that is occurring. You're thrown, imagine, in the middle of a battlefield. Now you choose how long you want to hold the sword in your hand. You choose how long your species continues in violence. But what is the opportunity cost? This is what I feel most violent people don't understand. Why is there a suggestion, don't be violent? You know? Why? Because when there is not violence, the same energy that was going to be used for that violence begins to have an internal direction. When it has an internal direction, that external rage and violence becomes passion for the evolution of the mind. And what that means is geniuses will step out of their shyness. There's 8 billion and growing advanced communicators on this planet. Yet many of them do not even realize they're advanced communicators. Many of them do not even realize they're advanced communications of the universal sector. Because we're so idea-bound. We're so ideological, you know? And we have to, it's very unique. Either language evolves or we do. And language doesn't seem to be evolving because it hasn't even considered the idea. And when I say language evolving, I don't mean just like from the Queen's English or the King's English, we're going to like the savageness of hipster lingo, you know? Like, I don't mean it like that. I mean that language is a technology. It's a vehicle of use for conscious being. And how much the vehicle defines you. Imagine you step in a car and you forget you're a person in a car, you think you're the whole car. It is the same for how language has become, in some sense, the skin of this ego we think we are. Whew. Guys, I'm going to need an intermission, so I'm going to put an Alan Watts short video, or I'm going to put a Terrence McKenna short video. Let's see what we can find. Reclaim your mind. Okay.
Catalysts to say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen, to draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done, to push the envelope of creativity and language.
Wrong video. Okay, here.
Term which just simply means we have to stop consuming our culture. We have to create culture. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Don't even listen to NPR. Create your own roadshow. The nexus of space and time where you are now is the most immediate sector of your universe. And if you're worrying about Michael Jackson or Bill Clinton or somebody else, then you are disempowered. You're giving it all away to icons. Icons which are maintained by an electronic media, so that you want to dress like X or have lips like Y or shit-brained, this kind of thinking. That is all cultural diversion. And what is real is you and your friends and your associations, your highs, your orgasms, your hopes, your plans, your fears. And we're told, no, we're unimportant, we're peripheral, get a degree, get a job, get a this, get a that, and then you're a player. You don't even want to play in that game. You want to reclaim your mind and get it out of the hands of the cultural engineers who want to turn you into a half-baked moron consuming all this trash that's being manufactured out of the bones of a dying world. Where is that at?
We just heard the words of Terence McKenna from 1946 to 2000. He passed away in 2000, and it was this kind of lecture of his that really drew me to his content, even though I don't agree with all his content. But there is something very important about reclaiming a sense of true being. Okay, this became more important to me. You see, when you're young, I think you just want to fit into the most like valued part of this social spectrum that you see, or this hierarchical setting that we find ourselves in societies. However, I think eventually you go from fitting in into wanting to see how your intelligence fits into all of it. Okay, first you want to quickly find as many resources as you can so you don't die, but while you get those resources, you never question why. Where are those resources going? You see, because we have the wrong view of the human being, this is why we're having the wrong results of the human being. That means forgiveness was a permission for your mind to reconsider the new, not to reconsider, but to consider the new. Or any act of reconsideration is a sort of novel act. I'm going to go into a tunnel right now, a quote tunnel of certain writings in the Upanishads. And I want to kind of give you guys a sense, give the viewer a sense of how ancient states of mind considered existence. Okay, let's see. In the Brihadranyaka Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it says the description of Brahman. And Brahman, I gotta explain that to you. Brahman is like the ultimate state, think of it, like one of the ultimate gods, you can say. It's like the ultimate reality. He says the description of Brahman, not this, not this, for there is no other and more appropriate description than this, not this. Now the designation of Brahman, the truth of truth, the vital breath, is truth, and it Brahman is the truth. Okay. Right. Okay, here, this is better. It says, Brahman is the only truth, the world is unreal, and there's ultimately no difference between Brahman and Atman, individual self. So pretty much he's saying the individual self is the collective self is the individual self. In the Kena Upanishad, it says that which cannot be expressed by speech, but by which speech is expressed, that alone know as Brahman, and not that which people here worship. That which cannot be apprehended by the mind, but by which they say the mind is apprehended, that alone know as Brahman, and not that which people here worship. That which cannot be perceived by the eye, but by which the eye is perceived, that alone know as Brahman, and not that which people here worship. That which cannot be heard by the ear, but by which the hearing is perceived, that alone know as Brahman, and not that which people here worship. There's another passage from the Kena Upanishad where it says Brahman is known when it is realized in every state of mind. For by such knowledge one attains immortality. By Atman one obtains strength. By knowledge, immortality. This is about illusion, this next passage. It says, the first veil to vanish is ignorance, and when that is gone, unskillful behavior goes. Next, desire ceases, selfishness ends, and all misery disappears. Brahman is ever present, ever conscious, ever blissful. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it says, in the beginning, my dear, this universe was being, sat, alone, was just pure being, one only without a second. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it says, all this that we see in the world is Brahman. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it says, Brahman is reality, knowledge, and infinity. You see, guys, these words are words that move beyond individual meaning. As they move beyond individual meaning, the seeker is kind of being suggested to stop just being the reactive data and start being conscious of how they're conscious. And there comes this recognition of, again, this inseparability between the individual activity and the cosmic activity. You see, the guy who was looking for his soul recognized this soul is the whole, is the soul of all that is, in some sense. You see, for that reason. There's another saying, it says, Brahman that is immediate and direct, the self that is within all. You cannot see that which is the seer of seeing. You cannot hear that which is the hearer of hearing. You cannot think of that which is the thinker of thought. You cannot know that which is the knower of knowledge. This is yourself that is within all. Everything else but this is perishable. There's something here that on this website the person's written. I'm going to kind of read it. It's not from the Upanishads, but it's some guy's commentary on it. He says, the image of an object is carried to the brain by a sense organ. For instance, the eye. After passing through various sheaths, kosas, it reaches at last, according to the Hindu psychologists, the sheath of the intellect. There, the light of Brahman, or the self which is reflected in the intellect, illumines the mental state regarding the object, and thus one becomes aware of it. The mental image of the object is transformed into knowledge of the object. But this mental state is impermanent. Therefore, the consciousness, which in reality is Brahman, associated with the mental state, appears to be impermanent. So it's very interesting. It's like you're not impermanent, your thoughts are, something like that. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it says the infinite is bliss. There is no bliss in anything finite. Only the infinite is bliss. One must desire to understand the infinite. Swami Vivekananda he's a guy who actually kind of spread Vedanta in the West. But he says when the soul has realized that everything is full of the Lord, of Brahman, it will not care whether it goes to heaven or hell or anywhere else, whether it be born again on this earth or in heaven. These things have ceased to have any meaning to that soul, because every place is the same. Every place is the temple of the Lord. Every place has become holy, and the presence of the Lord is all that it sees in heaven or hell or anywhere else. Neither good nor bad, neither life nor death. Only the one infinite Brahman exists. According to the Vedanta, when a man has arrived at that perception, he has become free, and he's the only man who is fit to live in this world. Others are not. The worst punishment, according to the Vedas, is coming back to earth, having another chance in this world. Here is the greatest of altars, the living, conscious human body, and to worship at this altar is far higher than the worship of any dead symbols. So again, he's taking the person's attention to a sort of natural underlying universal intelligence out there. In the Chandogya Upanishad, it says, just as, my dear, by one clod of clay all that is made of clay is known, the modification being only a name arising from speech, while the truth is that all is clay. Just as, my dear, by one nugget of gold all that is made of gold is known, the modification being only a name arising from speech, while the truth is that all is gold. In the Aitareya Upanishad, it says, it being or Brahman thought. So it's kind of showing God's thought. He says, may I be many, may I grow forth. In the beginning, all this verily was Atman only, one and without a second. Atman alone, one and without a second, exists before both the creation and during the states of preservation and dissolution. Oh, sorry, this is... Okay, here, this is important commentary. So this is, again, the commentary from the guy from the website. He says, Atman alone, one and without a second, exists both before the creation and during the states of preservation and dissolution. Names and forms, which distinguish the phenomenal universe from the state before the creation, are superimposed upon Atman through Maya. Shankaracharya says Atman, like he's defining the word. He says the word derived from the root ad or at may mean respectively to obtain or pervade, to eat or enjoy, or to move without ceasing. The term Atman indicates the supreme reality, omniscient, all-powerful, free from all phenomenal characteristics such as hunger and thirst, eternal, pure, illumined, free, unborn, undecaying, deathless, immortal, fearless, and non-dual. So eventually you become free from all these. In the Katha Upanishad, it says there is one who is the eternal reality among non-eternal objects, the one truly conscious entity among conscious objects, and who, though non-dual, fulfills the desires of many. Eternal peace belongs to the wise, who perceive him within themselves, not to others. So perceive this universal intelligence within themselves, those are wise. And eternal peace belongs to them. Which is kind of unique because in Christianity we have a sentence that says the kingdom of heaven is within you. And we see in these ancient Vedic writings, again, this notion that peace is not an outer thing to find. Many ancient philosophers and minds comprehend this. Okay, so this is important. There's another unique commentary. He says, the guy on the website says, Brahman God is the one unchanging ground of the entire phenomenal existence, which is superimposed upon it through avidya. The Lord is the unchanging substratum of the entire changing universe during its creation, preservation, and dissolution. The deities and other living beings derive their intelligence and consciousness from the Supreme Self. As a piece of hot iron drives its power of burning from fire, without the consciousness of Atman, all beings would become inert. One enjoys real and everlasting peace only through communion with the Supreme Lord. The bliss that arises from the realization of the self is no doubt beyond thought and speech, which belong to relative existence, but it is directly experienced by illumined souls. Therefore, one should not give up the effort for self-realization as impossible. One should rather strive with faith and reverence. There's a chant from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that says, um, "Lead me from the unreal to the real. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to immortality. Peace, peace, peace." And Swami Vivekananda has this quote where he says, "Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached." So the uniqueness of our inner intelligence eventually wonders about the unknown until it begins to discover the ways it is moved by it. As our intelligence, as our knowledge realigns itself through entering the unknown or having a new relationship with the unknown, the way the knowledge is able to move and is active shifts. So pretty much your intelligence is really based on your relationship with what you don't know. The mind is I eventually came to this conclusion. This is why I don't fight language anymore. I can find myself content with ideas that come my way because I know that there's something more than that, and that it's not something that's more. It's like the awareness that you're aware. Once you abide in that, something unique happens. Your indecency within leaves. Similarly, indecency in outer karma changes. So trust me, it's the inner state. You see this in certain animated shows where the person has beaten all the enemies and has come to the final boss, the warrior. And the warrior comes to this final boss and suddenly sees the final boss is a reflection of themselves. Everything they do, the reflection does. So they can't beat the opponent at all. Okay? And the only way this warrior who's fighting himself, the archetype of himself, is that he stops fighting himself. He stops fighting this ultimate boss, which is a reflection of him. And when he attains peace of mind, the enemy leaves. So your last enemy on this planet is, believe it or not, how your mind is keeping an enemy there. Anyways, I hope this talk served you. I feel this is as much as I can share. Study. I'm going to leave you with what Zen Master Dogen, he kind of said it very nicely. He said, somebody came to him and said, what's the Buddha's path, man? Like, what's this ultimate light? Can you just tell me? And Zen Master Dogen looked at the guy and he said, yeah, you're sincere enough, I can tell you. And he said, to study the Buddha's way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. And if I can share my own experience of how that happened, it's as if I remember in 2011 or whatnot, I was being this self, okay? And eventually something happened that I began paying attention to how I was being the self in this world. As I paid attention to how I was being the self, I noticed the law of change that's universal. So I began seeing the changing self, so I realized it's just natural. Once you study the self, you see the changing nature. You see how you're constantly forgetting the past and moving towards what you're considering to be the future. And eventually, as you forget this self that has kept the world in a certain way, eventually you awaken to the nature of how things truly are. And that's when your mind is no longer on the surface. You have penetrated its depths. You have found a sort of contentment as an experiencer that is your whole moment of being. This is an idea that I roar often when I give these talks, because it's an idea that you're not just a part of your moment. You're not just the objective part. You're not just the subjective part. You're the whole moment. Trust me. You just don't know it yet because evolution has just given this much ability, allowance. Okay? So pretty much it's kind of like very profound. It's as if God entered man's mind and became everything. Okay? You know, God entered a creature's mind and became everything. It became the universal connectivity of intelligence in some way. And as we read in these Upanishads, there's consciousness was here first, and then the world originated through it. That means, in some sense, to the ancient Vedic mind, existence was a simulation of self, and to study that self came to the awareness of the ultimate. And I'm going to leave you off with, to be honest, also a Buckminster quote, our Buckminster Fuller quote. And this man was actually, I've heard some of his lectures, I don't know too much about him, but he's definitely a profound inspirational force, one of Alan Watts' actually inspiration. He said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Apply this to your life and you will recognize the spirit of novelty has a healing potential that no past remedy has. You just have to live for life, and you'll live for life, and you'll live for life in a way where you are no longer resisting how evolution naturally dances on. I hope this talk has served you. Much blessings and all this stuff.